is shooting at pretty much everybody, and Mike Pompeo pays him a visit. We'll talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hi folks, Chuck Holton here. Thanks for watching Hot Zone. I'm still growing this beard. It's starting to fill in a little bit. Let's talk about Israel today. Israel on Wednesday actually hit targets inside Syria that they say belonged to the Iranian Quds Force. And that's actually pretty plausible because it's happened before. It happens all the time. Iran has been steadily trying to build a presence in Syria to try to gain a foothold. What they'd like to do is get a corridor from Tehran all the way to Lebanon. They call the Iranian Crescent right through Syria. And so they're pushing hard to gain more influence there and to support Hezbollah in Syria and in Lebanon, to support terrorism into Israel, obviously sworn mortal enemies of Israel. And Israel just has made it very clear, we will not let you gain a foothold in Syria. If they detect that the Iranians are building up a base or bringing in people or materiel or anything into Syria to give to Hezbollah or whatever, they just bomb it. And that's what they did on Wednesday. There have also been quite a few infiltration attempts of terrorists trying to get into Israel from Lebanon. Now, I've been on that border. Let me tell you something. If we wanted to close our southern border, all we would need to do would be to ask the Israelis to come help, because the Israelis know how to close a border. And they did it. And their border is highly secure, highly monitored, and people still try to get across. They have all the time. There are terrorists trying to get across there, but Israel identifies them, picks them up, and either lets them take the room temperature challenge or drives them back across the border. And so they keep their people safe by having a nice closed border. Now, they are actually in talks with Lebanon to settle some maritime disputes, and maybe that's part of the reason that Mike Pompeo was there this week and meeting with the Israelis. I don't know if it's a kind of a victory lap or a goodbye tour, but the Israelis are very complimentary and very happy to have him.
You can't stand here and stare out at what's across the border and deny the central thing that President Trump recognized that previous presidents had refused to do, that this is a part of Israel and a central part of Israel. I remember, too, not long after I was a cadet, I was an officer in the United States Army, and I remember the international pressure to return this very place to Syria. It was all the rage in the salons in Europe and in the elite institutions in America to say that this should be returned to Syria. Imagine with Assad in control of this place, the risk, the harm to the West and to Israel and to the people of Israel. President Trump just recognized the basic fact that this indeed is part of Israel.
To help you understand the dynamics of this region, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Syrian border and Jordan and Lebanon, and how they play into the relations with Israel, I want to play for you a little documentary that we put together a couple of years ago with Oliver North about that, where we went to that area and we kind of showed you what it looks like and helped explain some of those dynamics. So here you go.
In the past 24 hours, over 75 rockets were launched from Gaza into Israel.
We've had to deal with over 12,000 rockets from the Gaza Strip on Israeli civilians, with over 1 million civilians in range.
Different organizations have different motives. Some have jihadic ideology behind them. Others just want to kill as many Israelis as possible.
People are scared. You're talking about half of Israel almost under terrorist threat.
It's one of the most heavily contested pieces of ground on the planet, and always has been. But tensions are especially high right now with the events going on with the Syrian civil war.
Our Life of Duty team has come here to meet with Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North and talk about what the future holds for this part of the world.
We're definitely a country that has a lot of history, and our culture has been shaped by events that have happened thousands and thousands of years ago.
So we're here at Masada in southern Israel, the site of one of the worst tragedies that shaped the national history of this country. There are a lot of similarities between Israel then and now.
Masada is the last resistance against the Roman army. It's the place where those defenders, less than 1,000 of them, on top of this mountain were offered the choice, slavery or death. They opted for death. It was a terrible tragedy.
Now, they're surrounded by their enemies today, right?
But it's not a whole lot different than what you've got. To the north, Lebanon and Syria. To the east, Jordan. To the south, you've got Egypt. All potential rivals for the fate of Israel. And of course, in many cases, sworn to destroy it. The same kind of situation they faced right here at Masada in 70 AD.
With Syria shipping weaponry to Hezbollah, Hamas lobbing rockets into Israel from the south, and fresh military hardware and weapons streaming down from Libya into Lebanon, cooperation between Israel and the United States is needed now more than ever.
So, Colonel, there's a lot of history in this area. Where are we?
This is the Three Corners area. It's the junction of the borders of Jordan, Syria, and of course, that's Israel. This is the key to protecting the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights, of course, are the key to protecting Israel from attack from the north.
So tensions run high even today, right here along this fence, don't they?
Well, of course, the unrest and the turmoil inside Syria, Chuck, has created great tension along this border. You notice the border between Jordan and Syria as we pass by, an unmanned checkpoint.
Right.
And so the concern is the terrorists who are now coming to the fore inside Syria could easily get down to Jordan and, of course, cross that largely undefended border between Jordan and Israel.
More worrisome for us is the smuggling of weapons into the Gaza Strip. So there's weapons that are coming from Iran, like the Iranian Fajr 5, that has a range of about 45 miles. And if you don't have a network, an international network of Western countries that are intent on preventing the smuggling of weapons, then there's nothing that one country can do. So having everybody work together in order to prevent that smuggling is critical. It's crucial.
Captain Eitan Buckman is an IDF spokesperson.
Everybody who lives in this country, everybody who serves in the IDF, knows that we're not facing an amorphous blob. We have very precise threats.
The road behind me runs parallel to the border between Jordan here and Syria up here. And these concrete revetments, protection just in case of fire coming from the other side. In between us, a minefield separating these borders from Israel.
We are not in Central Europe, and we are not in North America. It's the Middle East. There is no mercy for the weak.
Since the Gulf War in '91, the Israeli home front has been under attack numerous times, and that was a threat that got way worse in 2001 when rockets from the Gaza Strip started being fired on the Israeli home front.
There's no respect for women's life, no respect for human rights, no respect for signed agreements.
Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have focused on really creating their own infrastructure to create rockets.
You need now to really destroy the terrorist infrastructure. All of what is standing behind the barrage of missiles which are hitting here our civilian population.
They have thousands of them. They had 10,000 of them before the operation, and they're working on amassing bigger arsenal right now.
We also want to make sure they will not be able to re-equip themselves quickly and they smuggle weapons which are coming from Iran. You don't want to have it here.
We're on the precipice overlooking Nazareth. Out on the coast, Haifa, where the Iron Dome protection system has now been installed.
The Iron Dome is an interception system that's created in order to intercept short-range surface-to-surface rockets.
Joint military exercises are conducted with the United States each year that help U.S. troops familiarize with air defense systems, which are employed almost daily in Israel's Iron Dome.
The Iron Dome system is definitely one of the high points in our cooperation with the U.S. government and the U.S. military.
I would say something between 80 and 90% of the missiles, the rockets launched by the terrorists from the Gaza Strip to Israel, are being intercepted once we decide that we want to intercept them.
The Iron Dome systems, from initial check, has intercepted 7 rockets already today, only today. And this is something we'll continue to do in order to protect our civilians.
And that's where the cooperation really shines. We protected civilians. We saved civilian lives because of this revolutionary system. And it's a system that could save lives in other countries as well.
Israel is a partner of the United States, and we have to come together from time to time to drill our militaries, and this is one of the reasons for it.
I think we get much better in doing this, and we improve ourselves and them in working together.
That sharing trends and sharing our issues as commanders is always a good thing, and that's what we learn as this cooperating environment.
1, 2, 3.
Well, anytime we get a chance to practice our skills and practice our craft, it's a good time. Especially we can do it with another country and with all branches of the services together. It's just a great opportunity. It's beyond compare.
They are willing to partner. They're willing to help resource us, and we have a common bond as far as wanting to take care of our soldiers and make sure they're ready, and make sure that we all can execute our mission.
We have experience, the U.S. has experience, and when you put that together, the sum is definitely better than our individuals.
Captain, that's a U.S. aircraft. It was built in America. You guys are flying them. What's the relationship like between Israel and the United States?
Well, the relationship between Israel and the U.S. goes a long way. We share common values, and we're on the same route together.
The U.S. and Israel share more than military technology and intelligence. This country is also the only democracy in the Middle East.
This building up ahead is the Israeli Knesset, their parliament. It has got 120 members and, of course, represents over 30 political parties. And today, they're in the midst of putting together a new government. They just held elections. Bibi Netanyahu has been asked to put together a new coalition government, and that's the work that's taking place right now, even as Israeli warplanes are attacking sites in Syria. So the government continues to form, and the Israeli military continues to protect the country.
In addition, we share a common cultural heritage, with Israel being the birthplace of the Judeo-Christian tradition upon which our own country was founded.
This city, Jerusalem, this place where we are, Gethsemane, is the core of what we are as a people. It all comes from that, the Judeo-Christian traditions that make America what it is.
Began right here.
Indeed. And so I find that coming here is a reminder of what we can be as a country.
While there's no shortage of criticism for Israel in the mainstream media, we found a strong case could be made that Israel contributes more to American national security than any other single country on earth. Israeli intelligence sharing has been vital to U.S. interests in the region for more than 60 years. Thousands of items of military technology currently in use by our forces were invented and manufactured in Israel. From armor used on modern MRAP vehicles in Afghanistan, to counter-IED technology, to medical advances, American troops are safer around the world because of Israeli technological advances.
There's a reason that we're third in the world on an absolute number for patents. The startup nation, high-tech industry in Israel, we have managed to defend ourselves and at the same time create a society that flourishes.
Throughout the last several decades, Israel has been responsible for keeping countries like Syria and Iran from having nuclear capabilities. Without the Israeli bombing of Iraq in 1981, that country might have been a nuclear power on 9/11.
You know, they're surrounded by enemies, and yet, look at this prosperity. This is Tel Aviv, a city of well over 1 million people who are here because the rest of the world has rejected them. They've come here and they've prospered.
I can say I've been to every country around Israel, and you don't see prosperity like this in any one of them.
There's no other Arab in the world who can live in the Arab world and have the freedom and opportunities got right here in this country. And yet, Somehow in America, there's people in our government say, look, if you just give up a little bit more land for a little bit more peace, you'll get what you're looking for. It hasn't happened. Lord willing, it's not going to push these people into the sea.
Since its founding, enemies have surrounded Israel. That fact pervades every sector of the culture, with every young man and woman serving 2 to 3 years in the Israeli military. The lessons of the past are deeply entrenched in this society, and Israelis have no intention of ever being driven from their homeland again. Fortunately, this culture hasn't fallen prey to rampant political correctness, which could, in their case, literally lead to their destruction.
The ultimate Masada here isn't really the soldier who's doing his job by standing on the border. The ultimate Masada is somebody who lives in Sderot, or in Ashkelon, or in Beersheba, or any one of the tens of towns and cities in southern Israel that's been under fire for 12 years, because they know that that's where they can best serve Israel. That's today's Masada.
It's been said that strong fences make good neighbors, but right here along the northern border of Israel and Lebanon, that hasn't always been the case. For that reason, the Israelis plan to stay vigilant in the face of increasing tensions here in the Middle East, and they hope that America will have their back.
All right, folks, that's all we've got for today. Thanks for watching The Hot Zone. We'll see you again next week.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.